Hi, you're listening to the Rav Dessler Giving Podcast with me, Avram Ziedman. Join us as we weave together philosophy, psychology, and Kabbalah to uncover a new depth to what it means to being a giver. We have a dilemma on our hands. If I'm giving, then surely that requires a taker, which means surely it's impossible to have the entire world in a perfect state. You always have to have 50% of the world being on the taking side. Every time that I give requires someone to be able to take, and therefore I'm doing a righteous act, I'm doing a spiritual act, they're doing an animalistic act. How can it be that everyone in the world can become a giver? So Rav Dessler points out that there's a difference between taking and receiving. Kach and being a makabel. Taking is focused on animalistic side. But receiving can also be a form of giving. Imagine a scene, I want to be the knight in shining armor, and therefore I open the door for my wife. And my wife's thinking I can jolly well open the door myself, I don't need my husband. But you know what? He wants to feel like a hero. And therefore she accepts and she walks through that door. She doesn't need to. When she's receiving that receiving is for the sake of me. That receiving is an act of giving. So too, if I give my wife a present, if I buy her a bunch of flowers and the flowers aren't so great, and yet she receives those flowers from me, that's what I want. She has allowed me to be a giver, and therefore that act of receiving is an act of giving. What we see from here is by the mere fact that I'm giving, it doesn't necessitate that the response has to be a response of taking. It can be a response of receiving. The Talmud brings a scenario. A cow wants to give milk to a calf. The calf wants to drink the milk. The question is, whom wants it more? The cow wants to give to the calf more, or the calf wants to get from the cow more? By the calf receiving, it causes tremendous pleasure to the cow. We're not just talking about merely biologically that a cow's udder filled up is uncomfortable. That could be a physical representation of something deeper spiritual. The cow receives pleasure in being able to give to its young. And you can also sometimes see this with mothers and babies. The mother wants to feed the baby. The baby doesn't want to drink. The baby's perfectly fine without it, but it causes the mother pain. No, I want to feed my child. Let me ask you a question. What's harder, being a giver or being a receiver? Arguably, being a receiver is harder than being a giver. By giving, that feeling that we get, yes, is a feeling of being God-like. When you receive, you don't feel like God. You feel vulnerable. But by receiving, you're allowing another person to feel like a God. So what's greater? To feel like a God or to allow another person to feel like a God? Receivers don't get as much mention as a giver. Everyone looks at the giver and say, wow, look how great that person is. When it comes to receiver, there's not much recognition. Receiving is one of the greatest ways of becoming a giver. So let's take a practical example. Someone wants to tell you a joke and you know the joke already. One way is, oh yeah, I know that already. Yeah. When you do that, you deny the person to feel like a god. You deny that person to feel like I have something to be able to give. When you receive it and you listen to the joke and you don't tell them you know it, that kindness of receiving allows the other person to feel great. That receiving is a form of giving. But I want to take this to another level. When a person receives, not only are they allowing the other person to give, a person who is a good receiver makes the other into a greater giver. Let's give the analogy again about milk. When a baby suckles from a mother, the baby is converting the mother into a giver. But when the baby suckles, it makes even more milk to be produced, which means the more the baby sucks, the more the mother becomes a greater giver. I want to give an analogy with me and my wife. When I got married, my translation skills were terrible. And I was always incredibly embarrassed at, after all these years in yeshiva, and still my translation skills were that bad. So we got married, and my wife said, teach me. And I was awkward about it because my wife's translation skills were amazing. And I said, you don't need me to, you can read it yourself. She said, no, I want you to, please. And she sat down with me, and I opened up a Mishnah Berurah, Laws of Halacha, And I broke my teeth over the translation, and my wife helped me through it. And she asked me to explain it, and I explained it to her. When she received that information, not only did I feel great that I could give to her, but she encouraged me to do it more. And the more I did it, the more she received, and she encouraged me to do more and more. And therefore now, thank God, where translation's not really an issue, this is due to her. I more often get the recognition. I am the person who can be able to read all these books. But who's a true hero? The one who's hidden behind the scenes, the receiver who created the giver. There's a concept called chesed shalames, true giving. How do you know if something's true? When you don't get recognition. The classic example of chesed shalames, true giving, is burying someone. If you're on the road and no one else is around and there's a body there and you bury the person, what thanks are you going to get? None, because no one knows about it. A person who receives in this world is getting less credit. People don't recognize the greatness of it. A receiver is showing vulnerability. It's harder to be a receiver. That is a chesed shalames. It is a true form of giving. Gift gives out food. We're now just over 400 households every week that we give food to. And when we do so, some people feel awkward and they don't want to receive. But we tell people, please allow us to give to you. We have volunteers. We have people who want to give. If you don't allow us to give to you, then we can't do what we truly want. You are doing us a favor. Your act of receiving is an act of giving. And it truly is. The Gemara says, more than the rich person gives to those who are poor, the poor person gives to those who are rich. The rich person gives money. And that money, it comes, it goes, it's physical. But what does the poor person give the rich person? A mitzvah. When you receive, when you make yourself vulnerable, that is one of the greatest acts of giving. Be great, be a giver, be a receiver. This podcast was proudly brought to you by Gift, where we're on a mission to inspire and enable lifelong giving. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to continue exploring the art of giving with us, please subscribe.